Yo, 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 yo. Welcome to episode 2, count 'em, number 2 of Country Rap Tunes and Critical Race Theory. Thank you for being here with me again. We know you could have been any place in the world, but you're here with me, and I appreciate that. And if for whatever reason this is your first time tuning in with me, all you got to do is just go to my Instagram handle at Sociology Social Club, hit the link in the bio, and it'll take you to the first video that I did a couple of weeks ago. Or if you want to kind of bypass all that, you can just go to YouTube, type in Dwayne Matthews, Country Rap Tunes and Critical Race Theory, and you'll see what the first video was about. But with that being said, allow me to reintroduce myself. My name is Dwayne Matthews. I am a third-year sociology PhD student at the Howard University, and I'm using this platform to create content that allows me to watch the two things that I love most, which is hip-hop and sociology, see how those two things intersect and see how those two things merge to hopefully make somebody else life a little bit easier, either somebody that's in undergrad who's trying to figure out what discipline or what major that they want to pursue, or somebody in the PhD program that's trying to figure out like, what the hell am I doing here, and am I going to finish up the next 4, 5, 6 years of this program. So with that being said, I'm going to just jump right into episode number 2. Back in March of 2021, I actually took a trip to Boston, Massachusetts to go to the MFA. The MFA is the Museum of Fine Arts Boston. They had an exhibit, I'm not sure if it's still going on right now, but it was called Basquiat and the Hip Hop Generation. And my introduction to Basquiat actually came through the God MC Hove. He had a song called Most Kings, and in Most Kings, he had a verse in there that went something like, inspired by Basquiat, my chariot's on fire, everybody's taking shots, hit my body up, I'm tired. I think that's kind of how it went. I might need to double check that on Genius. But anyway, you kind of get the gist of where I'm going. That particular line prompted me to do my Google research. It took me to his documentary, The Radiant Child. And after I saw the Radiant Child documentary, it took me down to the PBS documentary that they did on Basquiat. And from there, it took me to the Basquiat biographical film played by Jeffrey Wright. Something important to note within these 3 documentaries, it was 2 people that kept on coming up in conversation. One of those people being Andy Warhol, who was an artist himself. And then another person too, maybe lesser known, but honestly deserves his own documentary himself, is actually Fab Five Freddy. Now, Fab Five Freddy was just this overall cultural guru. Fab Five Freddy was just OG as it relates to the social scene, the cultural scene, and just kind of an overall people person. Fab Five Freddy had enough insight and enough foresight to realize like, yo, we need to curate a space for people like us. And so he actually, and a few others, created this street exhibit or this cultural hub called the Canal Zone. At this particular time, Basquiat, people knew who Samo was, but they didn't necessarily have a face to match that name. So Basquiat actually came down to one of the Canal Zone parties, and he started doing his graffiti art. It got the attention of other spectators, and it got the attention of other artists, and essentially he stole the show. I have to credit Fab Five Freddy for even curating this space where Basquiat can even kind of get that attention and garner that respect among his peers. In my opinion, what makes Fab Five Freddy so legend-like is the fact that he was able to kind of curate these spaces and really, really put young artists on and young musicians on, that allow them to express themselves. You have to remind yourself that this was late 1970s, early 1980s in New York City. Right, so it's not the New York City that we know today to be this, specifically Manhattan, to be this vibrant, commercialized, huge billboards, constant lights going on all the time. Like, this was the grunge era. Like, this was, the Bronx was burning era. This was Manhattan at its core, right? And so Fab Five Freddy curating these spaces and allowing young people to come from their respective boroughs of Brooklyn, where Basquiat is from, or the Bronx, the birthplace of hip hop. Hip hop created the space where young people can talk about the things that affected them. Some did it through the form of emceeing, some did it through the form of DJing, some did it through the form of breakdancing, and some did it through the form of graffiti, which is where Basquiat comes in. So this level of creativity within the city, as it relates to fashion, as it relates to art, as it relates to music, as it relates to literature, as it relates to language. The sociologist in me, again, it makes me think about sociologist George Simmel. And George Simmel, he was the sociologist of modern culture, things that are more aesthetically pleasing, things like architecture, art, music, fashion. George Simmel said that fashion is not a matter of individual choice, but choice is structured around class division. Trends were only cool when it was only done by a few, but it got played out real quick when everybody else started doing it. There has to be some type of individuality in the way we approach the world within our fashion. There has to be more creativity, more individuality in the way that we present ourselves to the world, rather than everybody just wearing Supreme and Jordan 1s. But that's neither here nor there. That's something for me to rant and rave about on a different podcast. But anyway, with that being said, George Simmel is OG sociologist of modern culture and the creativity that took place within modern culture. George Simmel hated the same old, right? Shout out to Basquiat. Again, that's a connection. We don't have time for the same old. Like, what can we do next? We're on to the next one, right? How can we keep progressing? How can we keep going? How can we be individual? The reason I really, really wanted to equate George Simmel with the likes of Basquiat or Fab Five Fred or maybe even Andy Warhol is because George Simmel, a lot of his work had to deal with the city, within the metropolis, and in either with mental health in the metropolis or how money is being spent in the metropolis, right? In the metro area. So two of his greatest works, one was called The Philosophy of Money, and the other one was called Metropolis and Mental Life. Simmel was fascinated by the city. He considered the metropolis where culture displayed itself. He felt that urbanites could be cold and maybe even apathetic. He said because beating to the drum of others was the threat to their individuality. But anyway, back to Basquiat. What I can really, really appreciate Basquiat is how he used the black body as kind of like the epicenter of it all. Basquiat realized that him being a black man, he occupied a really, really unique space full of white artists and white buyers, and he knew he couldn't take that role very lightly. He knew that he had something to say, like his particular piece, Not for Sale. It was said that Basquiat, at one particular point, people kept on coming up to him trying to get him to make certain things for them, rather than letting Basquiat do the work that he wanted to do. Basquiat's piece, Not for Sale, it lets me know that he was keenly aware of the manipulation, the extraction, and the exploitation of labor. And he took his labor very serious, in which is why to create the statement "not for sale" to me is one of the most important and powerful things that you can do. And I believe it also will make, Karl Marx extremely happy, knowing that he understood the value of his labor and that he would not just give it away to please somebody else. He valued his time and he valued his skill set. And so his particular piece, Not for Sale, I love it just because of the message behind it. Basquiat was completely aware of like these social constructs such as race, class, power, so much so that it gives credits to his particular artwork called The Slave Auction. As we know, the slave auction was the commodification of black bodies for white people, because black bodies were seen as the most valued resource during the slaveocracy, particularly in the South, where King Cotton was the biggest raw material. They needed cheap labor, free labor in this case, and that free labor was the black body. And then so with Basquiat's art piece, Not for Sale, and the art piece of Slave Auction, you kind of see his thought process. You kind of see his mindset as it relates to the extraction of labor and the exploitation of labor. Which in my opinion makes him a sociologist at his heart. Oftentimes we think about how the black man body was being used, traditionally to build structures, to lift things, kind of this more laborious type work. But we oftentimes forget about black women and how their body was of more value than that of the black man. Black woman's body was used for reproduction of more slaves, in reproducing more black bodies in order to keep this assembly line, this system going of slavery for that of slave masters. And if we're keeping it within the same realm of how black bodies were constantly always under white supervision, Basquiat also did these other socio-political type paintings as well. One of them in particular is called Defacement. And Defacement shows two police officers of a piggish, kind of pinkish hue beating on that of a black male. And that black male in this particular case was Michael Stewart. Michael Stewart was a graffiti artist in New York City and also ran in the same circles as Basquiat. Well, the story goes that Michael Stewart was resisting arrest. So as a result of him resisting arrest, the police had him handcuffed and hogtied and beat him severely, beat him so much to the point where doctors say he was brain dead and that he was hemorrhaging blood. Michael Stewart would eventually die 13 days after his arrest. It's been said that this shook Basquiat to his core because he expressed that could have been him that police had beaten to death. So there was a sense of camaraderie, there was a sense of understanding that he had with Michael Stewart, not only as an artist, but as a black man with a similar profession, this is also the very thing that is sustaining Basquiat, that is also putting him in magazines and news articles. So you have to kind of ask yourself, at what point should one lose their life over an art form? You know, if you ask me, there is no point where anybody should lose their life over an art form. The idea and the fact that graffiti is linked to criminality, but there's also another component at hand that you have to also think. Being black is also extremely linked to criminality as well. And this was Basquiat's socio-political way of challenging systems and challenging the mainstream. And he was able to challenge the black police officer. There was a line drawn in the sand, and you have to choose a side. You have to choose a side. You know, do you choose the side of your black peers, of the black community, or do you choose that side of the state apparatus and the group that has historically oppressed you and your forefathers and mothers? I understand that we all have a job to do and we all have to sustain and maintain our respective families. However, at what expense and at what cost? I respect the individuals that do put their life on the line to make sure that I stay safe as well as my family, but one can also critique in the way that somebody goes about doing it, right? Especially when it comes from a system that has historically been designed to keep you oppressed. It's not completely beyond my realm of thought that black police officers want to do something benevolent for their community. I respect that wholeheartedly, and I appreciate that you want to police an area in a neighborhood that you love. But the question becomes, does the system allow you to police it the way that you know to be best? And does it benefit the community, or does it benefit the institution? So with that being said, my time at the Museum of Fine Arts in Boston was absolutely amazing. The fact that Basquiat has become one of the greatest contemporary artists of the 20th and 21st century, a black man, is amazing to me. And the fact that he was able to use his God-given talent and use his labor to challenge institutions and to challenge social structures is also amazing. But the fact that he came up during the hip hop era and obviously inspired by the art form of hip hop through his graffiti art, you know, with the backdrop of Planet Rock, you know, with the backdrop of the message from the Grandmaster Flash and the Furious Five, and with the help and with the camaraderie and with the encouragement of the great Fab Five Freddy, which is how I can also appreciate the fact that my introduction into the art world was through an individual who was also inspired by a genre that I love near and dear as well. With that being said, thank you for listening to this particular podcast. I really hope you enjoyed it. I'm going to try to continue to do more of these. I plan on getting better. I will get better. This is all for the sake of bridging the knowledge between hip hop and higher education. And to make sure that hip hop remains in the conversation, and to make sure that hip hop is taken more serious within these institutions, within these Ivory institutions, and make sure that young people that's coming up, you know, right now who are trying to break into education, who are also trying to have more appreciation for hip hop. Hopefully I'm that conduit for the two. The only thing that I ask along this way is that you join me in the journey, and, you know, we continue to grow with each other. And with that being said, this is episode number 2 of Country Rap Tunes and Critical Race Theory. I want to thank y'all all so much for hopefully watching the entire video. And I'll see you again soon for episode number 3. Peace. One love.